Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Anything and Everything podcast, where we talk about anything and everything.
Excluding from religion and politics.
I'm Dustin.
I'm Devin. And we also don't talk about controversial topics in those regards. Only controversial things that we will ever talk about is like movies or comic books or anime, which character is better than whose stats are better, who's more powerful, etc. Stuff like that. So yeah.
What we're talking about tonight is the original Disney fairy tale stories, like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs,
Cinderella,
Pinocchio, which is really fucked. Pinocchio, Frozen. What's the other one that I listened to the other day?
I listened to The Little Mermaid.
Little Mermaid, yeah. Hans Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good author. Really fucked up sense of humor. That being said, if you guys love Disney stories, there's a podcast on Spotify if you are a Spotify premium member. It is called Once Upon a Time. I highly go and look into it. That's what I was listening to, and I knew the story of Little Mermaid and the story of Frozen. It's the Ice Queen. They're both written by the same author. Phenomenal author. I highly recommend going and taking a look at it. Hello from San Antonio, Texas. I am a tow truck driver. Walsh Towing. Thanks for joining the podcast. So, you want to start it off?
Sure. But before we get into it, for those of you that are watching on YouTube, we have a live stream on TikTok, which you guys can find in the link in the description below, which I will put down. And that way that you guys can interact with the podcast. You guys can say hi, what's up? If you guys have any questions that you guys would like to for us to answer, definitely don't be afraid to ask. If you also want to be a part of the conversation, that's the reason why that we do it on TikTok Live.
I did comment in the section I am moderating from the actual Anything and Everything podcast page.
Yes. And that is going to be anything and everything on TikTok, except for the G at the end of anything and everything, and 3 1s at the end of that. Which again, I will link in the description below. But yeah. And yeah, you actually turned me on to that podcast about the Once Upon a Time.
Yeah, so...
And it was actually really interesting because...
None of the fairy tales that we've heard are the way that they were actually written out to be.
Right, and I knew going into it that the whole thing was going to be the actual story behind why Walt Disney actually started creating these characters.
Yeah, I thought it was actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, plus, also at the very beginning of each episode, the guy talks about a little bit about Walt Disney and what was going on behind the scenes of him actually creating this fairy tale of these movies. So like Snow White, Pinocchio, all of these bunch of Disney princesses and stories and stuff. And it was just actually really interesting because the first episode is just him talking like about maybe like 10 minutes of Walt Disney's essentially origin of him going and creating his production company and then going into it and then creating basically Mickey Mouse, which was of course at the time Steamboat Willie.
Yep.
And then he created Mickey Mouse, and
Oswald the Rabbit was his first creation. Well,
right.
Technically his first creation was a horse. A dentist on a horse?
I think so.
It was either a dentist or some form of a doctor or something on a horse.
Yeah.
And he was paid at a very young age. Thank you for the gift. At a very young age, he was gifted a money, or he was given money to Justin, I cannot do that on my live. I will do that off my live, and I will have my family do it as well. we keep all religion and politics out of this, but I do send my condolences to your father. That's definitely a hard thing to go through. I do apologize though. He was paid for a horse, a picture of a man on a horse, and he ended up. Oh, she's at it again. He ended up deciding at that point that that's what he wanted to do with his life, was become an artist. And he went to movies and saw that a good majority of the short films that were there were all cartoons, animated, and that's where he fell in love with it. Danica's sending us coffee shots.
Oh, okay. Well, I wish I would take a coffee shot because I'm actually really tired. Yeah, the whole thing that he starts off with each episode is they have this guy that talks a little bit about Walt Disney at the time, of where they were going with the story and what was happening at that time, and then there's a woman that would actually talk,
read the story,
like read the story, just like if you were to read it from a book. And I'm guessing that's what essentially that she's doing, is that she's essentially just like reading this from an actual book and telling the story as if it was happening. But it's actually really interesting for some of the stories that they were talking about. I think that they were just going in order
of release date.
Of how the Disney movies were released. So everybody knows that the first Walt Disney animated movie that came out was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So they talked about that one, and then they talked about Pinocchio, which was after that. And so, to me, it was actually really interesting to know about what was going on in the process of actually getting this stuff done, and especially in Snow White, where they had to really condense it down and made it more family friendly for people to actually go and watch and be entertained by it. And
thanks, baby, for hitting up our goal.
The whole thing about it was that you couldn't really know what it was, because apparently they said that everybody pretty much knew the story of Snow White, but they wanted to know what it looked like on screen, so they went and watched the movie, and then they thought that the movie was actually better than the actual story, which was actually really interesting to me, because especially nowadays, where we grew up watching these Disney movies when we were kids and stuff, pretty much the majority of everybody has, and that we just don't know the actual original story of where it came from, where it was based on, and everything like that. Because even with Snow White, like that story was actually a lot more horrifying to hear.
Oh, absolutely. Same with Little Mermaid. I think The Little Mermaid has been one of my favorite ones, just because it has a deeper and darker meaning. And if you actually pay attention to The Little Mermaid 2, the daughter is actually drawn after Lars's wife. Lars is the prince in the actual Little Mermaid.
Oh,
and how's it going, David? So Lars, the depiction of the Little Mermaid, in the actual story, mermaids, when they die, they turn into sea foam.
Great.
They don't have an everlasting soul.
Yeah.
Because they already live a long life. Well, in the Little Mermaid, she fell in love with the prince, Lars, and I think it was Lars. I believe it is Lars. Falls in love with Lars, and he ends up being saved. She saved him from drowning.
Right.
and put him in a monastery. And there was a woman that looked just like her in the
in the chapel, because he wakes up, come to find that he's there, and he almost drowned to death, and so he's like, um, what is it like? Not congratulating.
What do you
That's not
mean?
the word. Basically falling in love with her because he thinks that she saved his life when
It
in
was really
actuality,
the mermaid.
it was the mermaid.
Now, so
Which her name is not Ariel like it is in the movies.
No.
Either. It's not. They all of the characters
have
that
different
are
names
in the actual story, are different
besides
names.
besides the evil witch in Snow White.
Yeah.
Same name.
Mhm.
I find it hilarious.
Yeah.
And same thing with Snow White. Like her
Yeah.
name is still the same. It's just
Yeah. I mean, it's
it
still
was
the
the
same
first
thing.
one,
Like,
and it was Walt Disney's pride and joy. That is
Yeah.
the finding factor of the Disney Brothers Corporation.
Yeah.
Well, so Lars ends up meeting this dark-haired woman that has made her life about the covenant, the religion. And so that being said, because she made her life about the religion, she couldn't marry, well, of course, Ariel, looks just like this woman. Now, if you go into Little Mermaid 2, they literally made their daughter
Mhm.
the exact depiction of that woman.
Right.
But Ariel, I can't remember what her name is.
Right. Because, like, from a young age, with her grandmother would tell her stories of the surface world, versus Ariel's sisters. They were more infatuated with, like, love stories and all this bunch of stuff. But Ariel was more fascinated about the surface world, just like it is in the animated movie. And that's all that she cared about. Well, when she was 15 is when she was able to actually go up to the surface and see what was going on. And it's pretty much just like the animated movie. Like that.
The whole
it's
beginning
pretty
is literally the animated movie,
right.
but they
But
had to
there's
change
no-
it for the younger kids.
Right. And so, like, even for like Snow White, they put music in it because they wanted audiences to really like and enjoy the story that they were telling. And then from that point on, they've just always had music sonatified in the movies from that point on, because kids really enjoyed the music. Parents can watch the stories that they heard about and see how that they are and all this bunch of stuff. And they didn't have any music in the actual story, so they just made up music for them.
Except
But-
in Little Mermaid, they did talk about music. So because Ariel wasn't used to legs, every step she took, it was actually like stepping on shards of glass. Now, to carry on with what happened with Ariel, is she fell in love and she was betrothed as a maid to Lars. But Lars said, if I can't have this woman that is in the covenant, I might as well make you my wife. She could not talk. It's just like the movie.
Because, like, the whole thing is that, of course, like with Ursula, everybody told her, don't go to her because she's a witch, she'll trick you, blah, blah, blah. And, of course, just like in the movie, she goes to Ursula, asks her, hey, I want to be a part of the surface world, and I want to, basically, because I love this man so much, I want to, basically be with him. And she goes like, okay, well, I need something in return. And just like in the movie, I need your voice. But in the actual story, she cuts out her tongue so that way that she can't actually talk.
And she never will be able to again.
Right.
Like,
it's not like in the movie where
She'll gain
she
the tongue back.
defeats Ursula, and then she will gain her voice back and stuff. No, she's just completely without her tongue, so she can't talk. And she's like, okay, like, you can't come back to the ocean. You're just permanently with lakes, so you can't come back. If you cannot marry him within a certain amount of time,
With
then you
true love
yeah,
between
with true
both
love,
parties.
because you might actually truly love him, but if he doesn't truly love you when you guys marry, then you will just turn into sea foam and you will just basically die. Um, Otherwise, if that does happen, then you can live out the rest of your days on the surface and just do whatever that you want to do. But those are the only two catches. One, she can never talk, and two, she can never return to the ocean world. Um, and yeah, like what Dustin just said, the whole thing is that when she tries to take a step because she's not used to it, every step that she takes is like walking on shards of glass, if not knives. But throughout the course of the story, she doesn't mind the pain because as long as she's with him, it doesn't matter. Um, and she basically goes along through this whole thing, and they ended up not really having that much of a happy ending at the end of it.
It does, but it doesn't. So
Yeah, it's not like that
Towards the
everything goes
end.
back to normal and everything's fine, or like she marries the prince just like in the movie.
she doesn't,
Yeah.
because the woman that decided to be part of the covenant decided that she loved the prince more, and
Well,
they ended up getting married. Ariel, because it was Ariel and him that were supposed to be getting married, but they ended up going
his
to another.
father ended up going like, hey, I'm going to set you up with this princess so that way both of our kingdoms can be good. And
Right.
that was the whole thing.
But
And
he didn't want to, due to the simple fact that he did love her because she looked just like her.
yeah,
Well, they end up going to this other kingdom, and there's rumors going around about who he was going to be married to, as in the princess. And it turns out that she decided not to be part of the covenant anymore. And since she got married, they were going back overseas to get married in his kingdom. And while they were on the ship, time was running out, and her sisters came up. They cut all of their hair off in order to get a sharpened knife to kill the princess.
no,
So
it's to
they
kill
could,
the prince.
or to kill the prince for betraying her, basically. And
She was about to, but then decided that
decided
she
she
couldn't.
wasn't going to.
So she threw the knife
Into
over
the ocean, and she
the ship.
died. She turned into cold foam, or sea foam.
Yeah.
Now, when she died and turned into sea foam, she actually got reincarnated into a wind spirit.
Yeah.
And those wind spirits are the ones that are made to help people live happy lives on the sea, to protect sailors, to give the sailors wind when traveling across seas. Now, they are doing exactly what she wanted to do with her tongue. She wanted to become a human. She wanted to become mortal. And after, I think it was, 300 years of helping sailors and
Something
stuff,
like that.
they are able to become mortal. And mermaids don't cry, by the way, but they can feel the sensation of wanting to cry. These wind spirits are able to cry. So when she turned into a wind spirit, she kissed the princess on the forehead or cheek, one of the two.
It was the
Forehead,
cheek,
it was the
and
cheek.
then the
and then she
prince was the forehead.
Yep. And then she whisked across the prince's forehead, and she became a wind spirit. And that is literally how the story ends. It is nothing like The Little Mermaid that we watched on Disney.
Mhm.
But the crazy thing is, like I said, if you listen to the story and you pay attention to both of the movies, the Ariel and what's his real name in the movie? Eric. Ariel and Eric's daughter is depicted as the woman that he ended up marrying. Now, for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, man, I loved the ending of that. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it was actually
Oh
really
my
good.
gosh.
Which we won't talk about all of them. We'll talk a little bit about the ones that we have heard, especially the ones that I heard, because there wasn't too many that I listened to for the podcast. But essentially, It starts off with Snow White's mom.
Love you, baby.
She really wanted to have a daughter, but she couldn't. And what is it? She goes to someone.
It wasn't.
It was
She
like-
couldn't have a daughter. So, in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, I've read the story. It's the way she read it is it's good, but it's not like reading it yourself.
Yeah.
Because I was not getting the full picture as I would if I was reading it.
Yeah.
So in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the queen, or wasn't really the queen because it's the king's sister. Princess. Wouldn't that be considered a princess as well?
I think so.
Because it's
Because
not
if you're
due.
married, then yeah,
You're the
'cause-
queen.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
she is a princess.
yeah, so she was the queen's or king's sister, and the king had to choose a husband for her. Well, he kept sending suitors away because they weren't good enough for her. Well, she was tired and she wanted a child. So she ended up going to a witch and said, I want you to give me a child. Well, the witch warned her with every potion or every magical spell, it costs something. Well, this magical spell, she had to do it before midnight, and she ended up wishing for a beautiful daughter with skin as white as snow,
With
of
lips
as red as blood. Yep, and then
hair as black as something.
yep, and then voice, a singing voice.
Yeah.
Which is very similar to the actual movie of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Mm-hmm.
But then it changes.
Yeah, it literally
She
flips
dies.
on a dime because after childbirth, she ends up holding Snow White
For
and then ends up dying because of the spell that she used.
Now, with the king, he loved his niece like no other, and he would do anything for his niece. He ended up falling in love with a baroness, and if you guys don't know what that is, it is a very wealthy, gorgeous woman. So he fell in love with a baroness and got married to her. Well, because now there's a woman in Snow White's life, she goes and talks to the baroness and asks her to comb her hair or brush her hair and braid
Yeah.
it. Well, the baroness was talking to her magic mirror, and
So basically, the Baroness is like the Wicked Witch in the movie
correct,
because
she
they
is the
decided,
Wicked Witch.
yeah, they decided to switch that instead of having her uncle being the king, like in the animated movie, and then having the Wicked Witch be his bride and basically make this whole twisted story, as we'll talk about it. But it was essentially just like taking this one character and just making her something different for the animated movie, which actually was almost spot on because she would ask her mirror like, hey, like who's
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And before Snow White turned 18, the mirror would always say,
you are.
you are. You are the fairest in the land. Now, but before this goes any farther, she ends up getting hit because she realized
Snow White
spied on
saw
her doing
that.
And
And then she goes like, so then
the mirror
Baroness-
changed back to a mirror, and
then
she
the
saw.
Baroness, the Baroness saw her and goes like, hey, it's not cool to basically spy on people. So she goes like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
I
but
just wanted you to braid my
brush
hair." And,
And
so
she does.
Yep. And so no, she
No.
doesn't.
Well,
so
no,
she
doesn't.
grabs the brush that her
Well, she
mom gave
starts
her.
actually-
No, she didn't.
No?
No. She doesn't grab it at all. She grabs the brush like acting like she's going to, and then
Yeah.
she whacks her in the face, cutting her face with it and basically knocking her unconscious. The king, when Snow White woke up in her bed, the king was sitting by his bed or her bed, sharpening his dagger that he always carried on him. And when she awoke, he said, "Who did this? They will pay for what they did to you." And she told him word for word everything that happened. Well, the king grabbed all of his guardsmen and went to her room, and she's wearing literally just a silk gown, hugging in all the right places because she was going to seduce him.
Yeah.
He went in there with all the guards.
Well,
And
first the guards came in
No,
because
he
she
went in.
thought, she thought that he was going to come in by himself.
no,
But then the
he
guards
went,
came in
yeah,
first.
he went in first, and the guards followed right behind. Like it was literally they were stacked on him,
Hmm.
like they were on him. So the moment that the guards came in, she's like, "What is this?"
Like, what's going on?
And with the king being raised as a gentleman, he's sent the guards away. Well, he confronted the queen or the
Yeah,
baroness
queen.
about it, and she lied. She's like, what'd she
Yeah,
say?
she
slipped?
demanded. No, she
Oh,
demanded.
she demanded that she
that
brushed her hair
yeah.
and braided it, and she just whacked her to teach her a lesson. And then the king said,
That's a lie.
no,
Because
he didn't say that's a lie. He's like, that, I can't believe I didn't see this before. All in shock. And she's like, what is that, my king? And he says, how good of a liar you are.
Yep.
And out of all the rage that she had built up because Snow White told her on her, he was going to stab her, and she grabbed the dagger and stabbed him.
No, she slit his throat.
Or slit his throat, dropped on the floor, cleaned his dagger off, and put it in his hand. And when the guards came in, because she started whining or crying and yelling and asking for help, the guards came in and she said that Snow White, or that the king,
I thought it was weird because she asked for their help
to get into
and then-
bed.
Yeah, to get into bed. So
And
like
when the
one of the
guard-
guards picked her up, just
and-
brought her into bed, and so
Yep.
she, just like if it was a normal Tuesday, she just like grabbed the
Calmed
sheets,
down, covered herself up.
and then they're all like, "What the hell are you doing? Like,
What
your
happened?
husband's dead. Like, what happened?" And then so she goes like, "Oh wait, duh, that's right. I have to basically make up this lie." And so she started telling them this lie of that he was basically I don't really know how to describe it, but basically not doing savory things to his niece, and so he couldn't take the guilt anymore. So then he decided to unalive himself.
He was being seduced.
Yeah, by his
niece in a way, which was all a lie,
Yes,
and that he couldn't take the
guilt anymore.
guilt of wanting, the urge, the lust.
Yeah.
And so he ended up taking his own life. So Cinderella is, or not Cinderella, Snow White is now a maid. She is stripped of her dignity.
Yep,
and becomes
just
a
thrown
maid.
into not even like a dungeon, just like an empty room with nothing in it, and she's dirty.
She's
and
cleaning,
everything.
cooking, doing everything.
Yeah.
And she's still getting abused by the queen.
Yep.
Now, what really drives me nuts is the way that the other maids treat her.
Mhm.
They treat her like garbage because she was doing all of this stuff to the king to make him end his life. Like,
Yeah,
But-
so basically, everybody that was in the kingdom that she grew up knowing and loving like a family, they ended up betraying her because of what the queen was telling them, of going like, "Hey, like this is what happened," blah blah blah. Word started spreading, and then they just didn't trust Snow White after that point.
and she just wanted to
So-
run away, and the maids are like, "It's better to stay here due to the fact that you will have a roof over your head."
Mhm.
Well, when she finally turned 18,
She like,
the
oh no, wait, I was gonna
the
say then she
Baroness-
left, but she didn't.
No, the Baroness said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" Because she has to have that ego boost. So the mirror appears and says,
It's
"You,
you,
queen,"
but
it says, "You, queen, are fair, but the fairest of them all is Snow White, or the princess." And at that point, she hired the huntsman, who used to be a stable boy, to go and kill her. So in the middle of the night, Snow White woke up to a big brawly man with a giant beard standing over her bed, and he threw a knapsack over her head and took her out in the woods. And he pulled this knapsack, and Snow White sees him and knows exactly what's about to happen. So she begged for her life. And when she begged for her life, the huntsman stopped mid-swing of his knife to kill her. And he realized what he was doing was wrong.
Yeah,
And he's like,
because
she said, I won't tell anybody. I will disappear. I will go far, far away, and no one will know. And he said, she will know. And if she knows, I am dead, and so is my family. And then out of nowhere, he says, get out of here before I change my mind. She takes off running, and she is running all night. She ends up going over the mountains, and she hears rustling in the woods. She's afraid people are following her at this point. And then finally she comes across this cabin, or this cottage.
Yeah.
This cottage in the woods, and she pulls up to the door, and it's shorter than her, and she's afraid to knock on it.
But
finally
she walks in.
Well, she
like,
finally knocks on it because thunder struck and it scared the crap out of her.
Yeah,
And the
so
owls and wolves. So she knocked, nothing. There's nobody home. And then she finally collapsed and sat in front of the door and leaned back. And when she leaned back, the door just opened. And she was shocked to see that there were tiny beds, 7 tiny beds, seats for 7 at a tiny table. It looked like for children. Well, she finally fell asleep in one of these beds. And when she fell asleep in one of the beds, the next morning when she woke up,
there was these 7
little
men
bit of
that
chuckling
were-
and laughing and giggling. And she sees them looking in from the living room or the dining room where they're eating soup. And they didn't do anything. The other beds were messy and they fell asleep. And when they woke, they left her alone and just let her sleep.
Mhm.
Well, she told them what had happened, and the leader of the 7 dwarfs said that is very sad to hear, and you should not be treated this way.
But the other thing too is that they weren't like the names that they were in the movie. They
No.
were all
Winky,
like,
Dinky, Slinky, names like that. I don't remember all the names.
but it wasn't like happy, grumpy,
No.
dozy, or drowsy,
Drowsy,
stuff like that.
Dopey,
Yeah.
Sneezy, late. I don't
Doc.
remember. Doc. Doc was the only one that was not like Z.
Yeah.
So
like all of them were basically essentially those names, but they just weren't like how basically people feel, like happy, grumpy, sneezy, all this bunch of stuff. Like they were just random.
regular miners, like they
Yeah.
were regular dwarf miners.
I mean, it's basically essentially just like the movie,
Just different
but
names and
different names,
different personalities.
different personalities, different perspective of the story, because it wasn't night like it was in the original movie. Like during the movie, it was daytime, so she was just out in the woods, just like walking around, and then she stumbled upon the cottage, and then stumbled upon the 7 beds and the 7 chairs and all this bunch of stuff. Realized that it was dirty, and so she cleaned everything, and then she got so tired that she just fell asleep in one of the beds because she was cleaning all of this time. And then the dwarves come in and they go like, oh, who is this? We have no idea who this is. And it's essentially to that effect of that it was like pretty much almost paralleled, except for, again, the murdering, the adultering, the really twisted take on the movie.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
on
I
the
mean,
story, but-
the very end. So like
So yeah,
the queen finds out that
she's still
Snow
alive.
White's still alive.
Well, the huntsman goes back to the kingdom, and the queen is waiting outside for him. And this is still at night.
Oh, this
so
is
still
so
at the same
twisted.
time. So
I love
yeah,
this part. though.
when I first heard about it, they talked about like, oh yeah, like it's not suitable for children under 13 because of cannibalistic behaviors. And I'm like, what is the cannibalistic behavior in the story? So he comes back to the queen. He goes like, all right, I did your dirty work. Here you go.
Here's the
sack.
liver
No, here's the sack. And so it's like sopping wet
of
with
blood.
And so she opens it, and it's like lungs, liver,
and kidneys.
like kidneys. And so she goes like, great, I'll have my chef prepare this for my meal tonight. So she and then they describe it as like her eating it, and then just
She
going like
realizes that it
it's,
tastes like pork.
Well, she realizes that she's like being a cannibal because she's eating the flesh of another human person,
and
and then
she
it tastes
gets
like
younger.
pork. Yeah, she gets younger, which is the weird thing too.
Right. That part threw me off. Like, so when in witch lore, around this time,
Mhm.
if they ate somebody of young beauty, they became younger.
Right.
And that was like Hansel and Gretel.
Mhm.
That is literally the concept of Hansel and Gretel. The witch stayed young by eating children.
Right.
Now, she thought it tasted like pork, but she didn't care.
Yeah, she just ate.
She felt the wrinkles in her face going away, and she continued eating it and thought
Yeah.
it was delectable. Now, with that being said, the huntsman leaves because she realized when she said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" And the mirror says, "You are fair, my queen, but Snow White is the
still
fairest." And that's when she realized Snow White wasn't dead. So she went hunting for it was Snow White's the fairest upon the mountains. So
Yeah.
she traveled across the mountains, and the dwarf said, "You can stay here. We don't care about the witch.
Yeah.
You can stay
But-
here, but you need to help us." Snow White said, "Let me make my way. I probably will get in the way, but let me make my way." So they had her cook, clean, and help out around the house, so they didn't have to
Yeah.
when they got back
And
from
then
the
they
mine.
said, "Don't open
Open
the
the
door
door
for
ever."
anybody."
The first time she opened the door,
Yeah, because like the of course the Baroness could transform herself just like the Wicked Witch.
she transformed
she
herself
transformed
into an old
into-
lady that
well-
was selling, what are they called?
Braziers. And so she tried. So she had her try on the brazier, and so she tied it so tight that she couldn't breathe to expand her lungs, and so she just left.
She
and then
fainted and passed out.
the dwarves come home. They're around her, and they go like, "We need to get this off first." So they grab a knife, they cut it out, and then she wakes up to them surrounding her, and they're all like, "What happened?" So she goes like, "Oh, like there's this lady. She was selling braziers, and so she came in, blah blah blah." And they're like, "Okay, well, what did we tell you? Don't open the door for anybody."
The
Like,
second one,
So she goes like, "Okay, I understand. Like, I know my lesson now. I won't open the door for anybody else." So then the second one was that like
A
it was
little
probably like
girl.
a day or two after that. Little girl comes to the door, knocks on it. So she goes like, "Sorry, I can't answer the door." And everything like that. And so she goes like, "Oh well, you don't need to you don't need to open the door. I'll just show you what I'm selling." And it was a comb, or it was
the brush that her mom
she had
when
when
she
her
died.
mom, passed away. And so she goes like, "I will give anything for that brush that you have that you are selling." And so she comes inside, she shows her the brush, but
And
then
she
ends
starts
up,
combing
yeah,
it.
she starts combing her hair.
Felt great
and
for a
then-
while, and then a
then-
stinging pain, and
Yep.
she's gone.
because she hits her with the brush on the back of the head.
No.
So
She dug it in, and the tines
The
of the bristles dug into her head, and it wasn't even deep. It was just enough to penetrate the skin.
yeah,
They finally, the dwarves came back, removed the comb from the head, and she woke again.
and so they told her like what happened. So she told them, and then again they said,
You are going to
don't
be
know,
the death of me,
like
Snow
you
White.
don't know your lesson, do you? So again, we go home. You don't answer the door for anybody. So then, it was like again a day or two later or something like that. Then there's an old woman who is yelling for help, and she says like, she goes like, "If anybody's home, please, I need help. I can't get back up. I need my life alert."
Fuck
And
you.
so she goes like, "I'm sorry, but I can't help you." And so she goes like, "I would be much appreciated if you did." And so she can't resist. So she goes outside, she helps her up. She goes like, "Oh, I need my cane because otherwise I can't walk." And then so she grabs her cane, grabs it for her. And so she goes like, "Well, I did roll my ankle, so
And Snow White was hesitant about letting her come in.
I need to rest." And so she goes like, "Okay, fine." So she lets her in the house. She lets her rest her ankle and everything. And so she goes like, "Hey, while I'm here, I can sell you this thing that I
No.
want."
No, not so. So
No,
she
that was
was
the thing.
giving it because she was carrying
was-
that she helped her out,
Yes.
and it was out of appreciation.
Right. So what she decided to do was like, hey, I have this really juicy, delicious apple, and we can share it. And
She didn't say
Well-
share.
well-
She's like, you can have it, and
Yeah.
so out of hesitation, she's like, no, I'm good. Thank you, though. It looks like looks really good. You should have it. And she's like, how about we just share it? And she cuts it in half. The old lady takes a bite out of one
because
side,
Snow White is skeptical that might be
the poisonous,
might be poisonous,
and then
because,
she took a bite out of the other side, and at that point,
like collapses.
she was dead.
And
Not really dead. She was in a coma.
yeah. And it's just like in the movie where she takes a bite out of the poison apple, she ends up getting into a really deep slumber to where basically it's a coma to where she can't wake up for anything except for true love's kiss. But not in the story. What ends up happening is that the dwarves come home, they don't know what's going on, they don't see anything wrong with her. They were gonna bury her because it was
They mourned
few
her.
weeks.
So no, they mourned her for 3 days and realized that there was no decay or maggots or anything setting in. So they found a glass they made a glass casket for her, and they put her on top of the mountaintop. So then she can be preserved and looked
after.
And-
From that point on, and so
and
like they would take
turns every
on guarding
night.
her.
She was
And
guarded
The
24/7.
woodland creatures would come to
Visit
her and everything like that, and then cut to this. He wasn't even a prince.
He was
at
a prince.
first. Well, they didn't.
was a prince.
Well, they didn't say that he was a prince at first.
He was a prince in the book.
I know.
They skipped that part in the
Well, yeah, I
actual
know.
story.
But like basically, he was riding along with his fellow horsemen.
Night.
Yeah, his knights, and he gets a gleam of light from somewhere, and he goes
Thought it
like, "What
just
was
the
that?"
sun.
So then he goes trying to find it, and then comes across Snow White in the glass case, and she goes, and so he goes like, "Oh, she's the most beautiful woman that I've ever met. I have to have her."
I want to kiss her.
Yeah.
He couldn't hold back, and he wanted to kiss her. He offered the
I
guard.
thought it was like pretty off-putting to hear about that.
Oh,
Going, I
and
had to have her.
the worst part is when he looks at the dwarf that's standing on guard and says, "Can I buy her from you?"
yeah,
And then
because they're like, "No,
we cannot
like,
do
we
that.
can't. Like, no, she's not for sale. Like, beat it. Go kick rocks."
And then he says,
Um,
"I am a prince of this kingdom. May I please take her
because
to protect her?"
yeah, because
from-
it must be really worrisome for you guys to keep protecting her out here in nowhere, where I have guards on staff at all times to where they can actually look after her.
So
And
he
then-
gets her.
Yeah, and so like they put her on a wagon, and so like he's riding through, doesn't realize how rough that the road actually is, and then the coffin ends up jumping off the wagon, stumbling down a hill, and then she also tumbles out of the casket and ends up dislodging the apple that was stuck in her throat, and then becomes awake. And then of course he goes chasing after her because she fell out of the wagon, and come to find out that she's awake and doesn't know what's going on. And he goes like, "Oh yeah, the dwarves actually gave you to me for protection, and I'm a prince, and we're going off to my kingdom so that I can protect you." And she just goes along with it, goes like, "Okay, that sounds fine."
Now, needless to say, the Baroness, I'm not even going to call her a queen because she's a bitch, but the Baroness, every time she did this, poisoned Snow White, she would ask the mirror, "Who's the fairest of them all?" And he would give the same answer. Now, at the end of this, she did not, because she heard that she was gone.
Yeah.
She was in the casket, didn't care about it. Well, she heard 18 years later go by, or not 18 years later,
No, not 18
like a
years.
year
Yeah, like a year or
later
something
goes
like that.
by, and she hears that the prince is getting married, and that's a mirror, mirror on the wall.
Yeah. And so she asks the mirror again, "Who's the fairest of them all?" And again, he says, "You are," but
Thank you,
Snow
baby.
White is still the fairest of them all. And so she gets all pissed off of it again and goes like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna get ready for this party. I'm gonna go to the prince's castle and I'm gonna go hang out and see what's going on.
When she arrives, she is met with guards. They
Yep.
pull her out of her wagon and dragged into the king's room, the
No,
prince's
I thought
room.
it was the dungeon first.
It was it wasn't. It was in the room where that's where they ended up doing it, is in their room, and then she's dragged into the dungeon afterwards. So what happens is, no, you're right. It is
Yeah.
a dungeon. So
That's
she's
what I thought.
they're in the
'Cause they
dungeon.
keep her in the dungeon for so much amount of time. And then,
And then-
she's like questioning, like, what's going on? This is unfair.
Yeah.
I have no idea what's happening.
And then she's dragged into the prince's room and
Because
Snow White's room.
I thought that she was dragged into the ballroom.
Was it the ballroom?
I
It was
think
the ballroom. Yeah.
because
So
like it wouldn't make sense to just
because
drag her into
everybody
the
was
bedroom.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So they
then she was
dragged
dragged
her
into the ballroom.
where everybody, all
Everybody-
the guests are, and then she sees that the
Princess.
the prince is sitting on his throne, and
And
then
next to him
next to
was
him
Snow
is
White.
Snow White.
Well,
And-
so she's like, what's going on? And the prince said, you are being charged for all of these things that you have done to my queen. And goes
Ever
through
since
a
she was
list.
little.
Yep. Goes through a list of everything and then attempted murder 3 times.
Yep.
And then he's like, here's your crime, or here's your punishment. The
They end up
guards
like
go to the fireplace
Yes.
and pull out 2 iron boots. And
They're,
they
like,
remove her high
red hot.
heels. Yep, they remove her high heels that she comes shoes, high heels that she comes to the ball in, and they place them upon her feet. And she, before this, she was begging for mercy
yeah
and for
forgiveness.
and everything. And he's like, no. And then he placed the boots upon her feet, and they
And then
closed
she and
on
then,
her feet. So they laughed at her because she's dancing around because her feet are now burning.
Yep.
And,
And then she
couldn't
ends
accept-
up passing out because of the pain.
She didn't pass out. She did not pass out. She dropped.
That's what it was.
She dropped to her knees because of the pain. And this is literally how the story ends. Snow White
Is that the
grabs
prince?
the dagger.
Well, no, the prince gave her the dagger.
Yeah, she grabs the dagger.
Yeah, no, you said she just grabbed the dagger, but he gave her the dagger, going like, "Here's my gift to you, my queen."
Well, yeah. She walks up to her and slits her throat the way that she did
Slit
to
her
the
uncles.
kings.
Yeah.
And that is literally how the story ends. There is
Yeah,
no
so-
happily ever after.
No,
It is,
well, if you're Snow White, there is a happily ever after.
but it doesn't
because-
say happily
well,
ever
no.
after. It literally just ends that
Right.
way in the
Yeah.
book. Like it says,
That's it.
yeah, it just abruptly ends
Yeah.
like that. It's so weird.
like, because like it was my understanding that like some of these stories would be like more twisted, more like more horrifying, because I knew about the Little Mermaid, which I talked to my wife about this yesterday. That I understood from the Little Mermaid was that, like, she still made the deal with Ursula to get up to the human world, and so she was given legs, but every step that she took was like walking on razor blades and stuff.
right.
But I thought it would be more like, oh, she wasn't like a half fish, half person. No, she was like a humanoid fish that was horrific, that she was kind of like a siren that would call to
Sailors.
to come and basically be with them, because of
Well-
course back then you would be on a ship for days, weeks, months, years on end, because you're trying to get to a certain destination to do certain things like get spices or get money or whatever, and then you would be lonely on the ship because it would just be you and your crewmates that would just be there, so there would be no women. So then they would be enticed by the singing of women that they would just jump over, that they would just jump overboard, go swimming to find these women, and then they would end up drowning, and then they would just like eat them.
So Disney took off of the Germanic terms of a mermaid, which would be a siren, a Vikings term of a mermaid, which would be this beautiful half fish, half woman, and then the French form of a mermaid, which would be this beautiful woman that can sing, but she's basically a fish, the humanoid fish. he took off of all three of these different types of mermaids to make Ariel. That is literally how Ariel was made.
Yeah.
And what I find amazing about this whole thing is there's 7 seas, correct?
Mm-hmm.
How many sisters are there in The Little Mermaid?
I think there's 7, including Ariel, so that makes 8 in total.
No. So there's 7, or there's 8, or there's 5 sisters, Ariel. So there's 6 daughters of Neptune.
Poseidon.
Neptune.
Neptune? Oh.
Yeah, Neptune.
It's been a while since I've seen it, so.
So there's 6 daughters of Neptune. And each one corresponds with one of the most famous seas in the world. What would the mom be considered?
The what?
What would the mom be considered of the 6 daughters?
I feel like there would be the 7th sea.
Which is the Dead Sea.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just a little.
That would, yeah, that would actually be a thing because she wasn't even there. She died.
She died,
so,
during childbirth of Ariel.
Mhm.
Ariel's the youngest one.
Plus,
and she's the Red Sea.
Yeah, I was gonna say because of her red hair,
Yeah,
she'd be considered as the Red
she's
Sea.
the Red Sea, and then there's the the brown-haired one, and the black one. The black daughter is the Caspian Sea, and then I don't remember all of them, but yeah. Then there's the black-haired one, which is the Black Sea. But no, like it's. Thank you, Danica. Thank you, baby. Which is freaking amazing. Like I love the theories behind it. Just thought I'd crack a joke. But Pinocchio, dude, that is the one that I thought was the most wild one.
I didn't listen to that one.
You didn't listen to that one? All right. So in Pinocchio, just like he had that self-conscious, which was Jiminy Cricket.
Yeah.
Jiminy Cricket was actually in this one.
Yeah.
In the original Italian story of Geppetto and Pinocchio. Like he literally kept the same names in Pinocchio. But he changed things around. Pinocchio was an asshole. A massive asshole. And by that, I mean Jiminy Cricket, because
Jiminy Cricket was supposed to be his conscious of doing right and wrong.
In Disney, right?
Right.
So in the story, Geppetto's carving Pinocchio, and he carved one eye, and Pinocchio sees this man that's just digging a knife into him. I'm sorry, if I was woken up like that, I'd be
like, what the hell
I'd
is
be
happening?
throwing hands.
What?
So Pinocchio actually took his leg and kicked Geppetto in the knee.
Yeah.
And by the time Geppetto recovered, Pinocchio was already running around, causing havoc, ran outside, and then finally Geppetto caught him.
Yeah.
Well, Pinocchio was put inside of the room, and Pinocchio was causing a lot of problems. And because he was put into the room, Geppetto was actually sent to jail because of creating a creature, which was Pinocchio.
Right, because like even in the original, not the original story, but the Disney story, he was just a puppet, and then he wished to have a real boy, and then Pinocchio became the real boy.
Right.
Well, became not the real boy, but became self-aware.
Yeah. So what ended up happening was, as Pinocchio's just sitting there thinking about the things he had done. So this part's kind of funny. So Pinocchio falls asleep after Geppetto goes to jail, and he falls asleep by the fire, and his feet and legs catch fire.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. So he's freaking out. He's trying to crawl around, and before this happened, he was sitting on the bench just thinking and playing with a hatchet, a woodman's hatchet.
Yeah.
And out of nowhere, he hears a chirp, and it's a little cricket.
Oh.
And the cricket looks up at him and says, "I wouldn't do that if I were you."
Oh, playing with the hatchet?
Playing with the hatchet.
Yeah.
He's like, "I have been living here for 1,000 years. I am a talking cricket. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Geppetto's a great man." And out of nowhere, Pinocchio throws this woodman's hatchet at the cricket, and human blood, splattered against the wall. Geppetto, or the Jiminy Cricket, is dead. He
So-
killed the cricket.
I saw this TikTok of like this animated, basically kind of like a story panel, like a comic book panel type of thing, where it was literally just that effect, only without the hatchet. It was a hammer, and so Jiminy Cricket just goes like, "Oh yeah, I wouldn't do that if I were you," and so he comes walking over to
And smashes him.
smashes him. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the actual story, he throws this hatchet and it cuts Jiminy Cricket in half and kills him.
Mhm.
Well, as karma, he catches his legs on fire.
Oh, okay.
Geppetto's finally released from prison, and Geppetto comes in and sees that Pinocchio's missing the bottom part of his legs. And because it's all ash and there's ash on the hearth. Well, so Pinocchio's like, I'll be a good boy, please.
Fix my legs.
Build me new legs, please. I will go to school. I will do everything good, and I will be the best boy ever. Geppetto said, no. So then he started crawling around, crying and whining all over the place for 3 weeks straight. And then Geppetto feels bad, so he builds him new legs. He signs him up for school. He's on his way to school,
Mm-hmm.
and guess what happens? He hears drums and trumpets playing. So when he hears these drums and trumpets playing, he's like, I'm gonna go see what's going on. School can wait till tomorrow. He's like, I'm gonna be the best kid ever. I'm gonna get good grades. I'm gonna make my dad proud. And
And then he's all like, nah, fuck school. I'm gonna go
He's
see what
like,
the hell's
"Oh,
going on over here.
well, he shows up and he sees a circus. And he sees these little marionettes being played with and a story being played out.
right.
Pinocchio's ecstatic because he's never seen any other kid like that.
Yeah.
And he didn't realize a man was doing it. So he runs up on stage where these puppets, marionettes, are being played with, and it ruined the show.
Yeah.
But because it happened, the circus master, the string master, kicks him and says, you ruined my show. And Pinocchio pleaded with him. He's like, I am from a poor family. Please, I didn't know that those weren't real. I thought they were like me. And the puppet master's like, I'm sorry, but do not come back, and gave him 5 gold coins.
Yeah.
And when he gave him 5 gold coins, he's like, we're rich. I'm going to buy my dad a new coat and all this. Well, a fox and a blind cat met him in the alley, just like in the movie.
Yeah. And then they beat him up, and then they
No,
took
they
his money.
didn't beat him up.
No.
No, they befriended him and said, we can buy a tree that will make you rich.
It's a
Richer
money tree.
than, yeah, basically. So they go into a hotel where he pays for it with 1 gold shilling.
Right.
The gold shillings are underneath his tongue, right? And they realize, and then out of nowhere in the middle of the night, something happens and boom, somebody breaks into his room and they're trying to rob him. He's like, I have no more money. And as he's talking, they hear the rattling underneath his wooden tongue.
Yeah.
And they're like, give us the coins. And they take a knife and try and
Jam his mouth
open. So as they're trying to jam his mouth open, he grabs the fox's arm and he's pushing at the cat, and he ended up ripping the hand of the fox off. And he took off running
Yeah.
as far as he could, and they're still following him. The fox bleeding, and he runs into a creature. And this creature is a fairy.
Oh, I thought it was a dumbbell.
No, it was a fairy. And when he ran into the fairy had nothing to do with him, didn't want anything to do with him. And he's pleading for help. Well, the next day, the fox and cat just leave. They were done trying to get the 4 gold coins from him. And the fairy looks out and sees Pinocchio up at the top of the tree, hanging, hiding. And she finally brings him in and talks to him. And she looks at him and says, do you still have those 4 gold coins, or do you still have your money? And he's like, no, I don't want to give you any money.
Yeah.
And because this fairy is smart, she put a spell where every time he lied, his nose would grow.
Yeah.
So the nose grew, and she tested it again. Are you sure? I don't care about your money. I want to make sure that you have it so you can be safe. And finally, Pinocchio told the truth. And she took care of him until he found out that someone died back home and was eaten by a shark and thought it was Geppetto.
Yeah.
So he runs back home, finds out that it is Geppetto that died. But out of nowhere, the fairy brought him back to life. And that everything was all happy-go-lucky. They were all happy and everything. And then Geppetto actually dies of old age.
Right.
And then so he travels out and gets found by a circus, a traveling circus. And he said, I will take care of you. You work for me. I will take care of you. Everything's going great. And he's drinking with them. And out of nowhere, he becomes a donkey.
Right.
And this is where the whole donkey thing came from. Well, he betrayed that guy. And so he runs away and he ends up falling into an ocean that had piranhas. The piranhas starting eating and attacking him and killing him. And out of nowhere, the guy jumps in after him to get him. And the piranhas just ate the donkey skin away and he fucking lived because piranhas don't want to eat wood.
Yeah.
But the piranhas ate the other guy.
Yeah.
And he went back to town again to live in his dad's house. And guess what? His dad's alive again. Dude, the story's fucking insane. And then he meets a cricket again. But it's not a talking cricket.
Right, it's just normal cricket.
It's just a normal cricket. And he saved that cricket.
Because
That
he
cricket-
thinks that it was Jiminy Cricket.
No. He felt bad for killing that one cricket that could speak.
Yeah.
So he just kept that one cricket alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, it's such a weird fucking story.
Like, it's a roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah, that's why, especially from like the last episode where I talked about that I like more gruesome, twisted stories on certain things, like how I. Hey everyone, Future Devin here. Sorry for the abrupt ending of the episode for this week. The phone that I was using to record this week's episode on, unfortunately, ran out of storage, so that's the reason why that I'm here now, and just closing out the podcast. So basically, the ending of the podcast just had us talk about our thoughts, and this is the reason why you guys should follow us on TikTok. We are TikTok live whenever we record these episodes, and that way that you guys don't have to miss out on certain things that happen like this. So yeah, which reminds me, be sure to follow us on TikTok. That is anything and everything without the G at the end with 3 1s. On TikTok, I will link that in the description below. You guys can also follow Dustin on his TikTok channel because that's where we do the live streams on for the sessions. So that will be on the description below. I'm drawing a blank on what his username is called right now. So, but yeah, be sure to follow us at those 2 things on TikTok. We will be making an Instagram where we will be uploading clips on that as well. And yeah, so be sure to like, share, comment about a certain topic that you guys want us to talk about at some point. And then I'm pretty sure that we will be getting to that as soon as we can. So yeah, and also don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you guys on the next episode.